So I started this project a long time ago, like before I realized how to actually do video without putting my hands in front of the camera the whole time. Nice. So the first interesting problem with this whole thing was trying to get some sort of LED in here that are actually going to shine light 360 degrees around this plasma coil. Most of the other plasma coils that I've done have actually a place to put an LED to shine up into it, and I don't actually have to worry about getting a 360 light effect. So my first attempt was to take these two LEDs and solder them back to back and put them into the coil. Now this is a coil that I've cast. I'll put a link right here to my plasma cast video, and the video does me a lot of favors. It doesn't look as good in real life as it does on camera. So I ended up going with 5mm LEDs. This is a blue one here that I'm just testing out. I ended up going with white in the end, but these work really well. Kind of give you a hot spot in the center, which is kind of cool, as well as it actually gives you a 360 degree light coming out of the plasma coil. The other thing I need to worry about is these little vents here at the front. I'm going to put a 3mm LED here so I can actually have like a firing sequence go on. So I've got to cut all of these out and make sure that light will shine through them. So my jeweler's saw made super quick work to get the old existing plasma coil out. The plasma coil I have here, I've actually 3D printed and cast. Now, if you want access to my STLs, my sound files, or my code, all of my patrons will actually have access to that. So now it's onto this little tip piece here. I'm going to put this super bright silver paint on the inside so it'll actually reflect a little bit and hopefully give a little bit more light coming out the tip of this. I do want to point out two things while I'm doing this, and that's that the LEDs that I put into the coil, I've actually filed off the tip so they fit a little bit better, as well as when I cast the plasma coil, there wasn't a hole down the center. I actually had to go back and drill that hole out. Casting that in is actually pretty difficult, but the 3D file has a hole through it, so if you wanted to use blue LEDs, that's totally a way to do that. So now I need to make sure I have room for the wires. I have room for the LEDs, now I need room for the wires. I'm going to take this chisel and just kind of give me a channel coming around this side here where it gets a little tight. That way I can run all the wires through and be able to control all the LEDs that I want to. Now we're going to go ahead and do a little test fit, make sure every little piece fits together right and well, and I don't have to do any more filing. That plasma coil needs to fit in there pretty well. The LEDs are kind of supporting it as well, which is cool, but so far it's looking good. And here you see I have a 3mm at the front. I've got two 5mm LEDs soldered up in there. And now, if you notice, I only have two colors of wire. I have red, which is going to be the positive lead, and then I have the kind of copper, which is actually going to be all of the negative leads. I'm going to test each and every one of these when I go to put this into the actual arm joint, and then put different colored wires there so I know which wire is which when I solder them into the actual Arduino. I'm using super glue to stick the wires down where I actually want them, so when I go to glue this together, I don't have to fiddle with wires to push them back in to actually glue the two halves together. Once the wires are all tacked down, it's on to actually gluing this stuff together. I'm using plastic glue for this, and I'm using an ample amount of clamps on this. There's a tiny bit of warpage in the plastic on these bigger, flatter pieces, and I really want them to actually be connected when I glue them together. So clamps is a great way to do that, and the plastic glue takes a little longer to dry. But one of the advantages of this specific to me, a thin plastic glue, is I can actually clamp this thing all together and then add the glue and it'll seep into the crevices on the sides. So that's what I'm doing here, kind of gluing as I go, but clamping first for a lot of the pieces. So now that I have the main part of the gun done, I need to find a way to get wires all the way up into the body where the Arduino is going to be. This is the upper arm joint here, and I'm just going to have wires kind of nakedly going from this joint into the body. The shoulder pad covers it, and a bunch of extra wires on a night, no one's ever going to really notice that. So that makes this part pretty easy. I don't have to worry too much about dangly wires. Now onto the most difficult part. Now this is two pieces, which makes it a little bit easier, but also I have to have this in place with the housing of the gun. This isn't something that I can glue into other pieces. I have to actually glue it in while I glue the housing together. So that makes it a bit of a challenge. Now I'm going to hold it together and drill this hole. That'll give me a hole that is kind of coherent. I'm going to come back with an X-Acto knife and widen this out and make it a little bit bigger and make it enough to be able to fit all the wires through. But the drill gives me a good starting place and kind of gives me a good line to go along to give some relief. And now I have to thread everything together. I'm currently making sure that everything will fit together, but honestly, the hardest part about this whole thing is this arm joint here when it comes to threading. So I'm going to take everything apart and actually thread that first, and then build up to it and put everything in place. Again, a lot of these pieces are going to have to be glued in together at the same time, so it's a challenge. Now that I have each piece in line of the wires ready to go, I have to thread it through this one little knuckle here. You may notice I only have 4 wires, so I have one positive lead that goes to all 3 of the LEDs. They're all tied together, and then I have 3 different negative leads. I have no resistors in this whole system yet at all. My end goal here is to put these onto an actual LED driver, which will run constant current, and it runs through drain or through the negative side. So that's why I have the positive leads tied together. Getting the right arm angle is something that I've struggled with, but I think I ended up getting it okay on this one. One thing you might want to do is hook everything together, look where you want it, and maybe even make a mark to figure out where you want the actual joints to be, because I'm gluing these in place. And once we have it fully assembled like this without any of the detailed bits, I'm going to get some clamps and, I don't know, maybe drop it a few times. Now that this is all assembled, it's time to add some color. I'm using red for the positive lead. I'm going to use a blue for the front and back plasma coils because they're going to run on the same code, and then a yellow one for the firing LED. All of these are 3-volt LEDs, but again, they're going to go through an actual LED driver, so I don't have to worry about resistance, forward voltage, any of that stuff. Well, it's home stretch here. I have 2 more joints before this thing's actually completely glued onto the knight itself. The shoulder joint here, I'm going to go ahead and glue it into place, and I've cut a hole for the wires to go through, and I'm also going to dab super glue where that hole is to glue those wires in place. That way, if they end up getting pulled when I'm putting this onto the main body, or while I'm actually doing any of the Arduino work on the inside to get all of these wires hooked up to that, I'm not going to be pulling on any of these really thin, fragile wires, and hopefully have a little bit more resilience so I don't break it halfway through. So we're going to go ahead and test fit this now. I have other things I want to do before I glue this in place, but I want to make sure it fits. Now the hole's a little extra large so that the weapon can do the whole 90-degree rotate into those pins that are there to hold it in place. But other than that, I have a whole completed arm. And here it is in all its glory. I have a pulsing sequence going on from the Arduino, as well as a whole firing sequence. Now I will have sound on this knight eventually, and I'll have a video on that. If you want to help support this channel, I do have a Patreon, and all of my Patreons get update pictures of all the stuff I'm working on, as well as they'll have access to all of my Arduino files, my sound files, and the STL files for all the projects that I'm working on. Thanks for watching.